So let me introduce our first speaker. What a great day. You're in for a treat. This is going to be such a great day. Okay, our first speaker is Nicole Allen, and let me just talk to you a little bit about Nicole. Nicole is the Director of Open Education for the Scholarly Publishing and Academic Resources Coalition, otherwise known as SPARC, with no K at the end. She leads SPARC's work on OER, Open Educational Resources, focusing on public policy and engaging and supporting the library community. Nicole joined SPARC in 2013, already established as a leading figure in the OER movement through her previous role at the Student Public Interest Research Groups. During her 7-year tenure there, Nicole worked with college students to organize numerous large-scale grassroots campaigns on OER, should have been partnership, but that's okay, and related issue areas, including a 40-campus cross-country van tour called the Textbook Rebellion. That really, I was thinking of Ken Kesey and others on that, but that's another story. The Textbook Rebellion, organizing, and I love this one, 3,000 professors, you gotta love higher ed, 3,000 professors to sign a commitment to consider adopting open textbooks. You gotta love our world, right? Okay, I commit to thinking about it. Okay, all right, but you're there, you're already there. Nicole is widely cited in the media for her work. She's considered one of the leading issue experts on college textbook costs. She also currently chairs the steering committee of the Open Policy Network. Would you please join me in giving a warm LCC welcome to Nicole Allen as she speaks to us today on OER, Solving the Textbook Cost Crisis.
Hi, everybody. Thank you for that introduction. I'd be interested in chatting with you later about the idea of partnerships and grassroots organizing. But for now, I'm excited to be here today to talk about the problem. So we just heard some exciting and interesting examples about the solutions and the kind of things that are possible in the open environment. But I want to take a step back to make sure we're starting to think about the problem that students are facing today and the problems that faculty and institutions and our society is facing today and how we can address that problem through open educational resources. So my goal here today, I have a half an hour, and my goal is to give a high-level overview of what's going on in the textbook marketplace right now, how OER is being leveraged as a solution, and some of the things that institutions and faculty and students can do to help solve the problem. I'm not going to go into much detail. There are fantastic speakers later today that are going to cover all of these topics in more depth. So I'm hoping that you'll take away a good introduction to start out the day. So before I begin, just as a matter of note, all of the projects that I mentioned today will be noted in the slide deck, which I've already posted online on SlideShare. You can find links and citations to any of the research and projects that I talk about. So I'm also talking today as a millennial and a member of the generation that are college students today, Generation Debt. I was in college about 10 years ago, and we face the same problems that students are facing today. So I'm speaking here not only as an issue expert, but also as somebody who has personally been impacted by the high cost of textbooks and seen my peers walk away from college and, face the challenges that today's students face. We're all here because we know higher education is important, and that's especially true for our generation because we need higher education in order to go get a job, to make sure that we can have a family and have a good life and contribute to society. Did we have sorry, I think we had an issue with the, apologies. So this is the link to the slides that I've posted, if you need it, and that's also my Twitter handle. So backing up, we're all here because higher education is important, but that's increasingly synonymous with expensive. today's students graduate with an average of over $28,000 in debt. And almost 7 out of 10 students who go to public or nonprofit institutions graduate with debt. So, as I said before, we are increasingly generation debt. And when you compare the rising cost of college, even at public institutions, we're seeing just extraordinary amounts of money that students and families need to take on, and it's a huge financial burden. And we view higher education as an investment in our future, but we have to start our future already in the hole. And as much as public higher education was developed to make sure that our states and our people are able to have productive careers and contribute to the economy, our states have decreasingly been able to invest in higher education. So that burden has increasingly been pushed onto students and families. So we've heard a lot recently about the idea of free community college. The Obama administration and several presidential candidates have talked about making the tuition at community college free, which is, it's a step in the right direction. But the truth is, and this is especially true at community colleges, but other institutions too, that there is a way bigger picture here in terms of the costs that students are facing. It's not just about tuition. It's about living expenses. It's about transportation to school. It's about childcare. And increasingly, it's about books and supplies, the materials that students need in order to get the most out of their courses. And as we all know, the price of textbooks has been rising astronomically, about 3 times the rate of inflation over the last decade. Which is about 82%, and that's actually, the cost of textbooks has actually doubled since I started college, and I thought they were expensive. I was the kid that was using Wikipedia to try to get by in my courses because I didn't want to buy a really expensive textbook. So right now, the average budget for books and supplies at 2-year institutions, public 2 years, is about $1,300, and that's including supplies in addition to books, but you know what the majority of it is. At 4-year public institutions, it's over $1,200 a year for books and supplies. And well, you can see in both of these cases, it's a small piece of the pie. It's the light turquoise color up there. But there's something very unique about textbooks, and that's that you need these materials in order to get the most of the course that you're taking. And in a lot of cases, the cost of textbooks, after everything else that students are paying for, it ends up being the straw that breaks the camel's back. And the thing that, the last thing that they can't afford, that actually undermines their ability to succeed in school. So many of you in the classroom know this, but the prices of textbooks today are outrageous. These are just some introductory courses, and these statistics are actually several years old. But the top 10 average price of each of these books, a number of them are over $200. And even if you look at the average price of renting or buying the book used, it's still a lot of money. And you think about this again, students have to pay this out of pocket. In a lot of cases, financial aid doesn't extend to this after it's covered living expenses and tuition. So I'll just give you one example of a textbook. This is one of the very commonly used physics textbooks in the US. This book costs $241 to buy it new in a bookstore. And you can get it rented for $103, but you have to turn it in at the end of the course. That's not affordable, and we're talking about introductory physics here. This material is well established, and this is what the market-leading textbook costs today. And this is just one subject. And what, from my perspective, and I think I speak largely for my generation here, what's outrageous about this is that the digital options that are offered for this book are just as expensive. So it costs $103 to rent this textbook digitally, but it's only for 180 days. So not only do I have to pay over $100 to get access to a digital version of this book, which to me, I grew up with the internet, I'm used to being able to Google things and find things for free when they're digital. Not only do I have to pay that, but I can only keep it for 180 days. Now, does anybody here teach physics, intro physics? Great. It's a 2-semester course, right? Do 2 semesters fit into 180 days? No, they do not. So that makes this even more outrageous, because in a lot of cases, this subscription is going to run out before the students finish the 2nd semester of the course. This is the solution that's being offered by today's traditional publishers. And I think when we think about the larger principle that we can take away from this, the message that it's sending to students, you can have access to this book, but you better learn it fast, because guess what? Flash, it's going to be gone. So think about that in today's world, where the students have the technology and the ability to carry knowledge with them for the rest of their lives on a hard drive, as opposed to a huge library of books. This is the message we're sending them. You know, this stuff is ephemeral. You can only have access to it for a little while, so it couldn't be that important, could it? And that's just wrong. And of course, in today's world, students do have a lot of ways to save money. I think all of you in your classrooms know the many creative different things that students will do to get access to their textbooks. But the solutions that are out there, like these ebooks and renting and trading used books, sharing books, they're not solving the problem, because fundamentally the textbook market is broken. It doesn't work like a normal consumer market, where you have a producer that offers products and a consumer who buys them, and there's basically a negotiation and a fair playing field between the two. In the textbook market, it's actually a 3-party system where textbook publishers offer products, and once faculty members select a product for students, they have to buy it no matter how much it costs. And of course we know that this is the right way for it to work, because you as faculty, you're experts, you're the ones that know what you want to teach in your classroom. But that's a huge decision to be making on behalf of your students, and one that impacts them not only financially, but also pedagogically if they can't get access to the book. But what this system creates is the ability for textbook publishers to charge pretty much whatever they want for the books, because they know students need to have access in order to complete their education. And that is what has allowed prices to rise so rapidly over the past few decades. And as we've seen other industries be transformed around us, the film industry, the music industry, the news industry, they've been revolutionized by technology, but textbook publishing hasn't. And it's this dynamic that has allowed the continuation of high textbook prices and the lack of innovation we're seeing in the textbook publishing market right now. But it is actually compounded by the fact that the market is dominated by a set of very large companies. So over the 80s and 90s, there was a huge series of mergers and buyouts that left 5 big fish in the market, and they control the vast majority of content out there. So according to Department of Justice measures, the textbook market is a highly, highly concentrated market. So there's very little price competition between these different companies, and little incentive to offer more affordable options, because effectively by doing so, they'd be undermining their own future profits. So in addition to that, we're seeing the fact that the traditional industry isn't taking advantage of technology that's out there, because the business models that the publishing industry has been built on, the idea of selling a textbook for every student who gets access to it, which has been around since Gutenberg invented the printing press, has become more challenging in the digital world, where intellectual property is harder to control and harder to sell in the ways that print materials can be. So what we're starting to see is all of this has kind of created this dynamic where students are actually opting out of the market. And it's a really interesting point. We've seen a lot of studies recently that measure the amount that students are actually spending on textbooks. So I gave you a few statistics before about how much the budget for books and supplies is and how much textbook prices are rising. But these are actually the figures when you look at what students are actually spending. And they're much, much lower, and they're going down. That's the sign of a very sick market, where there's serious problems and serious sustainability questions of how long this can really continue. Because the factors that are leading to the dropping spending while prices rise are that students are opting out of the market. They're sharing books, they're using illicit means of getting access to books, they're not buying the books because the cost is too high. And it's wrong that students are put into that position. And basically where we've landed is that students are captives and not consumers anymore. And this is the opportunity that we have to change. Because you probably see this in your classroom. 2 out of every 3 students today say that they've skipped buying a textbook because the cost is too high. 1 out of every 2 students say that at some point they've taken fewer courses because of the cost of textbooks, which means it takes them that much longer to get their degree and get out into society and contribute productively to the economy. And less than 1 out of every 2 students now, so less than 50% of any given class, actually have the current edition of a textbook. So automatically, half of the class is behind because they're accessing an out-of-date version or no version at all. And at the end of the day, the takeaway is that students don't learn from materials that they can't afford. So we have a real question here about what's being assigned in classrooms and how we can leverage today's technology as an opportunity to help reduce costs. And again, looking at the bigger picture here of this amount that higher education costs and what students are spending, this isn't the biggest piece of the pie, but it's the place that we have the ability to address right now. Tuition, that's a really tough problem to address. That requires, federal and state policy changes, living expenses, transportation expenses. Those are all really big problems that we don't have easy solutions to. But this is a problem that we can address now, and it's one that can have a really large impact on students because in today's world, we can do better than the course materials that are out there today. So that's what brings me to this idea of open educational resources, or OER as we're going to talk about today. So I just want to briefly give you a high-level overview of what OER are so we're all on the same page, and some of the things that are happening in the marketplace right now. So when we talk about OER, we usually use this definition, that open educational resources are teaching, learning, and research resources. So textbooks, PowerPoint slides, anything that can be used to support learning, that either reside in the public domain or released under an intellectual property license that permit their free use and repurposing by others. And this is the key part, and that's what sets open educational resources apart from traditional other educational resources. It's this idea of free of cost, free of barriers to access, free distribution, and what we call the 5R permissions, or the permissions to use the material in ways that are intuitive in today's digital environment. And the 5 R's are to retain, meaning keep and control a copy, reuse, meaning use a material in any context you want, revise, meaning take a copy of it and edit it, adapt it, tailor it, remix, take several open educational resources and combine them into something new, and redistribute, so to be able to freely and legally share whatever you've created. And the mechanism that's often used for granting permission is Creative Commons licenses. So an open intellectual property license is the mechanism for allowing people, giving people these permissions, and Creative Commons is the most frequently used system for licensing, and we'll hear more about that later today. But basically what these do is use copyrights to enable free and open use. So copyright by default is all rights reserved, which says you can't use this unless I give you permission. And these licenses are like some rights reserved. They say, yes, you are free to use these materials in all of these ways. And there are different licenses that specify different usage terms, for example, limiting commercial use versus not, or allowing people to make changes and relicense the work versus not. And we'll again hear more about that later today. And there's a spectrum based on where you as an author are comfortable. So a few examples of how OER is being created. So I think if you're new to this space, one of the things you might be wondering right now is who actually would create a free resource and share it? There are a lot of really, really interesting things happening. So one of the early projects in OER and models in OER is OpenCourseWare, or OCW. And this was popularized by MIT in the early 2000s. And the idea was that professors at MIT were creating world-class educational resources to use in their own classrooms. So they set up a program to allow professors who wanted to openly share these materials with the entire world. And since then, over 125 million people have accessed and learned from these resources. And one of the things that I find really interesting, because these resources were made open, they've been translated into over 6 different languages. And there are tens of millions of people that have used the translations of these materials all across the world. So there are also different projects online that act as repositories where anybody who develops an open educational resource can share and post what they've created. This is one example, OERcommons.org. As you can see here, they have hundreds of thousands of free, openly licensed resources online that you can search by subject, by standard, and by license. And then from there, it kind of developed into this idea of textbooks. And this is something that my career has really focused on, is helping to transition faculty members who want to use a textbook but don't want to use a $200 textbook. And you'll hear later from Nicole from OpenStax, a project that's publishing high-quality, openly licensed, free, open textbooks in a wide variety of subjects. And the physics book is a direct competitor to the physics book I showed you earlier today, except it's free online and adaptable, and a print copy costs significantly less. There's also the idea of open courses. So one of the projects that I think is really interesting is based at Carnegie Mellon University. So they're actually going beyond the idea of a textbook and developing a fully articulated course that includes all of the materials and smart assessments that actually learn as students learn. So they can actually present a really high-quality learning environment for students. And this project actually generates a lot of really helpful data that goes back to improve the resources, so they know, if a lot of students are having trouble with one section, they should go back and fix that section. And that's something that's possible when materials are open and not when they're closed. And then finally, in terms of creating OER, there's a policy element to this as well. So right now, the federal government spends billions of dollars every year on grants and contracts that include the production of educational resources that we as taxpayers are paying for the development of. Those resources by default are typically closed. And that's not fair, because if we, the public, are paying for them, we should have the right to access and use and build upon those resources. And there's been a large movement in the federal government toward adopting open licensing policies on grant programs. This is one example, which has possibly the most ridiculous acronym that has ever been created. But is a fantastic program. It was a $2 billion investment in workforce training programs at community colleges. I think there are a number of TAC grantees here in Michigan. It included a requirement that any educational materials that have been developed with federal funds need to be released as an open license. And there are already cases of different colleges taking materials developed through these grants and adapting and innovating on them. The example I love the most is a grant that developed an energy-focused curriculum that's currently being translated into Spanish and used by a U.S. aid program in Mexico. Whereas before, they would have had to build a whole new set of resources. But now they can take what's already been built, translate it, and improve it and adapt it to the local context and share that back with the rest of the world. So a few examples of how OER is being used. So we've heard about how it's being created. So in a lot of cases, in a lot of the cases that I work with, OER is being used as a textbook. And that's okay, because textbooks are what we're used to using. And open textbooks look, feel, and act like any other textbook. They just happen to be free online. You can get them in a variety of different formats: PDF, e-reader. They can be printed at cost. And you can also get hard copies that can be sold in the bookstore that look just like any other textbook, full color, hardbound. This particular one, I think this price might be out of date, but Nicole can update you. And the impact of using these is tremendous. This is one example of a professor at Pierce College in Washington State that actually wrote an open textbook and saved his students over $1 million. Just his students. It's incredible, the kind of impact that this can have. And there's actually a great project at the University of Minnesota called the Open Textbook Library that's been going out and curating a list of open textbooks and working with faculty members to write reviews of these books to evaluate their quality. So subject matter experts, you can go to this website right now and search for open textbooks, read what other faculty members have written. And one interesting note is that this project is part of the Open Textbook Network, which is a phenomenal project, and they've been going around the country to do workshops with faculty about open textbooks. And what they found is that over a third of the faculty who write a review of an open textbook for this catalog end up adopting it in their course. So that is a really interesting illustration of the kind of quality materials that are out there available today. There's also movement toward the idea of applying the impacts of OER across entire degree programs. And you'll hear, again, a little bit more about this later today, but the pioneer here is Tidewater Community College in North Virginia. They replaced all of the textbooks in their business administration program, two-year degree, with open educational resources, and estimate it costs it reduces the cost of graduating from about 20 to 30%, while supporting the same level of student achievement, if not better. And this is just really powerful, especially when you think about this at your institution. You know, if you're a four-year institution, imagine your gen ed curriculum. Using only open textbooks, or imagine the largest degree program at your community college, two-year degree where students don't have to buy textbooks, where you don't need to delay your teaching in order for students' financial aid money to come in so they can get the book at the bookstore, where every student is on the same page starting day one of the class. Imagine the impact across an entire degree program. There's also interesting collaborations happening between traditional publishers and open educational resources. So this is a cool project at the University of Colorado where they've developed a set of really, really high quality simulations for physics and other sciences. And Pearson has actually taken a bunch of these free openly licensed materials and incorporated them into their books and online resources. So that's an example of how the open and traditional spaces can work together. And I think if we think about this as a spectrum and pushing to make sure that we're producing as much open material as possible and using as much open material as possible and only forcing students to pay for what there isn't an open or affordable option for. And then the final example I want to give, and I want to thank David for allowing me to talk about this, is an example of what's only possible when resources are open. So this textbook, Project Management for Instructional Design, it's a graduate level course where there isn't an open text, or there isn't a traditional textbook for this course, really. It's such a narrow area. So what David, the professor who taught this course, did was take a project management open textbook that was free and openly licensed, and he actually assigned to his students to turn it into project management for instructional design. So these students are learning the subject that they're supposed to be taught in the process of creating a resource that not only do they get to put their name on for their future career, but future generations of students can learn from and adapt and build upon. So I just think that that is an incredibly powerful example of the kind of teaching and learning opportunities that aren't possible in a closed environment, but are possible in an open environment. And not every professor wants to teach like this, but enabling this kind of opportunity for the future is really what we need to think about in terms of the future of education. So I want to close by just illustrating a couple of the impacts that open educational resources can have on students and faculty. I've talked a little bit about student savings. Here's some numbers. So there was a report released by the Student Pergs last year that found that on average, when you replace a traditional textbook with an open textbook, on average you save students $128. So think about that amount of money and what kind of impact that can have on the student, how many fewer hours they have to work, how much less debt they need to take on and pay back with interest. But what's really significant is if you think about that in the context of all of the students in the United States, if we were to replace just one textbook in one course for every student across the country, it would save over $1 billion every year. That's a huge, huge impact. So this is the kind of power and potential that we have here. So there are also impacts for authors. So this is just one example of an author, Barbara Lowski, who's a community college professor in California. She wrote a statistics textbook, and by releasing it openly, instead of continuing to publish it closed, it literally transformed her career as an author. Now there are people who are accessing her materials all over the world that never would have had access to her book, the couple thousand students that were buying it traditionally. Now it's tens, hundreds of thousands of people across the world, maybe even millions. There are also impacts in terms of student outcomes. So this is an example, again, from Lumen at Mercy College in New York, where the math faculty in developmental math replaced their curriculum with open educational resources from an expensive traditional software and textbook package. And they observed a 12 percentage point increase in the number of students passing with a C or better. So what's the pass rate for developmental math at your institutions? I mean, this is a classic gatekeeper course that prevents students from moving on to other subjects and getting their degrees. And imagine that 12 percentage point increase in the number of students getting through the course with a C or better. That's transformative. And then finally, we're seeing a lot of research that's showing that it can actually have an impact on institutions as well, in terms of the number of students that are staying in their courses and not dropping out. So it's less tuition refunded to students who drop out. And in states with performance-based funding, where the number of students they graduate actually is tied to how much funding they get from the state, this can be huge. So I want to end with a couple of thoughts about what you can do when you go back to your campuses to help support OER. So I think the first principle is just making sure that faculty who want to share, make sure that they can share. So make sure that they're the appropriate policy environment that allows faculty to know that you can put a Creative Commons license on your work and share it freely if you want to. And then making sure that faculty who want to use OER have the support they need to do it. And this is something that my organization, Spark, has been really focused on in engaging libraries as supporters of open educational resources, and you'll hear a little bit more about that later today. And finally, just to involve students in everything you do. Students are the reason we're here. They're the reason that higher education exists, and they have valid viewpoints. So if you're starting an initiative, if you're thinking about making a change, talk to students, see what they think, and make sure their input is included. So I think the final point, and hopefully what you will take away from my talk here, is that we have potential today to do things that have never been possible before. And I think we all know that and see that. And what open educational resources are about, they're not the only solution out there for textbook costs, but they're the one that enables us to use the internet for what it was meant for, which is to share knowledge and to enable innovation and allow people to connect. And if we're only focused on costs and making things free, or enabling students to just get access to their books, that's curtailing the potential opportunity in the future to really use the internet in the ways that it was meant for, to improve teaching and learning and improving society. I hope that you think about that through the rest of the day. Again, these slides are posted online if you have questions about any of the projects or any of the citations in my talk. So thank you.